I wanted to talk to Ron Mark, and I will, about, and he's the Mayor of Carterton, former Cabinet Minister, former New Zealand First MP, former Minister of Defence, actually, and very possibly the saver of rodeo in New Zealand, I have to say, also as well. Great rodeo enthusiast, great rider himself, and he joins us now on the show, the Mayor of Carterton, His Worship Ron Mark. Ron, great to hear from you, mate.
G'day, Michael. How are you, mate?
Yeah, no, you did save rodeo, because that was under some threat there for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was. But, it was easy for me because I just love horses. I used to ride a lot. I haven't ridden a lot for a while, but that gave me the opportunity to get back on a horse, and and I thoroughly enjoyed the rodeo. It was great. I just take my hat off to all of those men and women who ride those bulls in particular, because my gosh, that takes guts. That really takes some guts to do that. And I don't fear for the animals. I fear for the poor buggers that are trying to stay on, because it's not an injury-free sport, is it?
No, not at all. No.
You got to have some to do that, mate. You've
got to literally have balls. Although you may not have them when you're finished.
Exactly.
Tell me, Ron, you're the Mayor of Carterton. You were the Mayor of... No, I'm just trying to get your political career right now. You were the Mayor of Carterton, then you became an MP and a Minister, and then you've gone back to being the Mayor of Carterton. That's right, isn't it? Is it that sequence?
I was an MP for, about 4 terms, and then I became the Mayor. I got elected twice here in Carterton. Then I broke my second term when I was re-elected back to Parliament, and then did another 2 terms, second term as Cabinet Minister for Veterans and for Minister of Defence. And when I came back, it was back to when I got booted out of Parliament. We were all booted out in 2020. I decided, I've had a guts full. I thought I'd done a pretty good job, Michael, and the reward was being thrown out of Parliament, so I pretty much said. But what I found is that my council had gone from being the second best performing to nowhere near the second best performing, and I had a lot of people put their head on me to stand for council again and put a few things right, and that's what we've done. And
so you got elected right 2022, is that right? You got re-elected 2022.
Yeah, that's right, mate. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that's interesting is that when you talk about when I went back, it wasn't quite the same as I thought as I left it. But I suspect that was universal, not just at Carterton, Ron. And you would have noticed perhaps the encroachment of particularly staff having a lot more influence and the governance side having less, yeah?
Oh, heck yeah. And I mean, it was one of the issues that I was continually being brought to my attention by a series of councillors, some of whom resigned during that period of between, 2019 and 2022. And, we had a councillor, Tracy Callaghan, who just got totally frustrated. Another councillor, Jill Greathead, there was a campaign run to get her out of council, and it was successful. There was another guy, Dr. Stephen Bertrand, a young man. Him and his wife were both doing their PhDs at the time. Very bright couple and very capable, very community-minded. They were both in the fire service as well as volleys. He stood for council, got very, very frustrated. And I saw slowly over time a number of councillors, including a mayor who didn't stand again and a deputy mayor who just decided he had enough as well, step aside. And a lot of that was just frustration at how the previous CEO had been managing them. Of course, she went on to go down to Christchurch to a high-paying job and has since been managed out of her job because of issues that were created under her steerage down in Christchurch. So, there are managers out there who like to control council, who like to control elected members. And there are also elected members who, who buy into the argument that, you've got to have workshops and meetings and discuss things fully, and to have them in the open is not helpful to free and frank discourse. And But there's a line, isn't there, Michael? There's a line at which people start to lose confidence in the council, in their elected members, and start saying that they are doing things behind closed doors, and they're seeing predetermined decisions passed with little debate at council, and at that point you lose the confidence of the people.
Yes, and the local government association haven't been very good on that either. But, and mind you, they're run by bureaucrats too in Wellington. But the Chief Ombudsman's come out and said, listen, we've had enough of this. Councils throughout all of New Zealand are taking a great deal of basically making decisions in secret workshops. At the very least, they should be open. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was because I saw from news reports that, I mean, it seems such an obvious thing to me and probably to you too, but you actually had a scrap about whether or not information in workshops should be made public.
Yeah, well, at risk of sort of, I don't want to, put divisions down my council table, but, it's a fact that two of our members are now publicly on the record for some rather bold statements, because clearly they took exception to the Ombudsman's direction and his paper, which is, I was quite surprised because the CEO and the staff quite rightly went through the report and analysed each of the recommendations and highlighted in our report and our agenda where we were currently complying and where we could make changes. And I didn't see anything extraordinary in that. I mean, some high-level minutes around notifying, looking at each workshop that's planned and making a deliberate decision with reason and rationale as to whether they need to be closed, using the natural default of all meetings should be open unless there is a very good reason, as the Ombudsman quite rightly says. I thought it was pretty straightforward, easy stuff, but clearly some people took offence to it, a couple of my councillors, and made some, well, even in one case, quite a derogatory comment of the Officer of Parliament, the Ombudsman himself, which I thought was, that's forever on the record now, and people might like to reflect on their time. But, in a funny sort of way, Michael, that's the point. There are a lot of things said in planning workshops and information workshops. And, I think one of my councillors said, if we put everything open, then young, new, fresh councillors might be too afraid to speak their mind. Well, gee, wow. That's why you stood for election.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why you put your hand up. That's right. Why you said you were going to represent. If you can't do that, get out. Because
that's right.
You've either got to have the rodeo balls to do the job or you don't. And if you can't withstand the public scrutiny on the utterances and the comments you make in workshops, then maybe you shouldn't be there.
Oh, listen, I totally agree with you. The other thing, the corollary of that is that also the information, you only got one source of information. It's the great flaw in local government, or probably in all government, but particularly in local government in New Zealand. If you've got one source of information, that's your own staff. So when you have those workshops, you usually only have that information as presented to you by staff, and then from that you make a series of, you might ask some questions, but ultimately that is the one source of information. If the staff have reached a predetermined view, and so is the chief executive, you're at risk, aren't you, of being led through the nose?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, and that's why, you with your parliamentary experience and your local government experience, you and I have both been on both sides of that fence, and we know how things are done in central government and in select committee. And, I did that as a cabinet minister. A reason I would say that I had the degree of success I had as Minister of Veterans and Minister of Defence, 67 cabinet papers through in 2 years and 100% strike rate, the largest increase in defence expenditure in modern time. And people are saying what they're saying about my performance. Why? Because I went outside and I had my own experience to draw on, and I could listen to some people and think, you don't know what you're talking about, or what you're saying is not the whole picture. And so I had my own personal experience of 20 years military, 6 years in the Middle East, operational to draw on. But I had a lot of people who had been my mentors, people I always referred to for conversation, discussion, bounced ideas off. And I put some people in some advisory roles whom I could trust to give me a different perspective, or who were bold enough themselves to challenge the advice that officials were putting at me. I mean, a number of cabinet papers, the drafts that I rejected, will always be remembered by those who wrote the P8 papers. And the final paper, which was finally done, and I rejected that as well, will always be remembered by those officers. But look at the result, because they weren't right all the time. And council staff are not right all the time. And if they live in a little cocoon and they talk to themselves, you can get one thing. What we do is we bring in external people who are specialists. We've done that on the rates review. But you've always got to be mindful. There was some good advice and good professional advice in that space. But you've always got to be mindful that you may not be getting a complete picture, and you've always got to be prepared to go out and talk to other people. I'm fortunate. I've got a couple of gentlemen who I meet with on the odd occasion, sometimes over a beer and a wine, sometimes just accidentally bump into, sometimes deliberately set up a meeting, who've both been CEOs of state-owned entities and international corporations. And, I would never say that I know as much about finance and as much about business models as they do, and particularly when it comes to things like rail operations. One of them ran the Great Rail operation through Australia. And, so you've got to have your external people you can go to get a different picture, or confirmation of what you're being told is bang on the button, which isn't a bad thing.